You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is?
What is the Matrix? Gynocentric society, Marxism, feminism. These are all manifestations of the Matrix, but they are not the Matrix itself. The Matrix is much more than any of these things, and to identify it, we must go back. Not to the 1960s, but way, way back. Before feminism, before Marxism, before industrialization, before government, before marriage, before nearly everything. In the beginning, humans were hunters and gatherers. Although no written records exist from this period, based on the comparable behavior of other mammals, it is likely that the male and female relations took two general forms. 1. The male would mate and quickly abandon the female to raise her offspring alone. This is common among simple foraging mammals that must compete for scarce resources. 2. The male would share his resources with the female in exchange for sexual companionship. They would raise their children together, the male hunting prey to feed himself and his family, the female hunting or foraging for edible plants along with the children until they were old enough to do it themselves. This is common among mammals higher up on the food chain. In this primitive state, the genders were truly equal. The male provided for himself and his family, not out of some sense of honor, masculinity, or cultural expectation, but because of the mutual benefit to all parties. However, in time, these families grew and became tribes or clans. The family trees began to branch, and the daily battle for resources by individual men trying to feed their families became warfare between extended tribes, fighting against other tribes in order to extend their territory, their influence, and their resources. The most powerful tribes would fight to control the rivers, the hunting grounds, the fields full of edible fruits. Once they controlled these areas, they would fortify them for defense. These became villages, cities, nations, governments. This was the moment where the Matrix was born.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
The Matrix is indeed gynocentrism and male disposability, but at its foundation, it is civilization itself. The blood of men greased the wheels of progress. As civilization advanced, it was men who built the walls to fortify the village. It was men who bore weapons and armor and marched to war against rival tribes, other men. The vanquished men's blood meant the advancement of the victor's tribe. The wives and daughters of the vanquished would be taken by the victors in order to grow their own tribe. This is the root of gynocentrism. Women were, and still are, the primary resource of a society. You see this even today in the fight regarding immigration and racial demographics. Nations, races, and tribes bloom and die out. Their women absorbed into the conquering nation, race, or tribe, and the cycle repeats again. Racism is the Matrix. What are races anyway? Consider Hispanics, which are a direct product of Spanish conquest upon the nations in the Americas. For all intents and purposes, the native populations were destroyed, and their women were taken by the white European Spanish as conquerors, and from that came the Hispanic quote-unquote race. Now consider the racism between blacks and whites. What would happen if these two races became one race, similar to the Hispanic race? Why do you care who other white people or other black people choose to have children with? They aren't your family, but because of tribal instincts, we perceive a diminishing white population or a diminishing black population as a threat to us and our family. We feel the need to support the group that looks like us for our own security. Nationalism is the matrix. What is a nation? It's just a line on a map where governments say one border ends and another border begins. Nations are born from revolution from other nations, or they are defeated and absorbed by other nations. Meanwhile, men fight and die for quote-unquote their country, while the women are taken as wives for the soldiers of the victor. Now, saying this doesn't mean that there's no difference between government systems. There is a huge difference between nations depending on the laws regarding freedom, property rights, taxation, etc. However, even in allied nations that are so similar that you can't even tell that they're different countries, there are real currents of nationalism. For example, due to the high corporate tax rates in the U.S., as well as the U.S. taxing global profits even if they're earned overseas, many companies have moved their headquarters to Canada in order to avoid these taxes. Nationalists want the U.S. government to punish these companies because they believe these corporations' profits belong to their government, and by extension to them. Religion is the matrix. Now, when I say religion is the matrix, I'm talking specifically about the tribalism you see within religion. Let's put the whole question of whether there's a God or not aside, okay? What do you see religions doing? In Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants fought and killed each other for nearly 30 years, and they were all Christians. Religion is just another way to form a tribe. Catholics against Protestants, Muslims against Jews, Sunnis against Shiites, and that's only within living memory. If you look back throughout history, religion was used to effectively grow one's tribe beyond national borders and familial ties. A man will fight and die to protect himself and his family. That is biology. However, it requires a tribal identity to get a man to sacrifice himself in the name of his race, his country, or his religion. That is the matrix.
What is the matrix? Control.
A man protects his family because he loves them. But a tribe cannot love you. It can only train you to love it. A country is just a series of laws and institutions, all corrupt without exception, and yet the patriot loves his country and will die to protect it. That is the power of the matrix, and you see this in every example of tribalism. You're a coward if you don't sacrifice yourself. You must do the honorable thing, the manly thing. In feudal Japan, samurai would disembowel themselves in order to protect their honor, their lives, not to mention all the years of training thrown away, in order to satisfy a nonsensical code of male human sacrifice. In World War I, men were given white feathers by women if they didn't volunteer for an all-male military and die in the trenches for a war that they gained nothing for either way. The government can conscript you under threat of death to fight in their wars and force you to pay your taxes, but this is not productive. It is much better if the men being exploited agree to their exploitation. They'll fight harder and require far less supervision.
Built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
There is a video from Stefan Molyneux called The Story of Your Enslavement, which I'll link to in the description, which I highly recommend everyone watch, and which covers most of the same themes I'm covering now. The only thing I would add to the words of Mr. Molyneux is that he doesn't go far enough into the nature of human farming. While both men and women are farmed for the benefit of the farmers, the leaders of the tribe, the so-called elites, the exploitation is not equal. Women are like the dairy cows. The farmers make sure they're well fed, so that they can produce good milk for the farmer. This is an apt metaphor because it goes without saying that all dairy cows are female, because lactating breasts are required to produce milk. Men are the beef cows. Unlike the dairy cows that are allowed to live long lives and are protected by the farmer, the beef cows are expendable. They are born to die, and their death means life for the farmer. Whether that farmer is the state, a religion, or a race based on arbitrary cosmetic and linguistic differences. In order to keep the cows mollified, the matrix is used to brainwash the beef cows into believing that it is their responsibility to become steak and hamburgers, that walking proudly into the slaughterhouse with their head held high is the honorable and manly thing to do. The situation isn't always a matter of life and death, but sometimes simply a matter of living a fulfilling life or not. Consider a rabid sports fan that buys memorabilia for his favorite team, goes to every game, and cheers the players on wildly. What does he gain for all this effort and sacrifice? Nothing, except for a false sense of belonging to a tribe. He feels like he's part of the team in a small way, even though in reality the team doesn't care about him at all. Sports teams deliberately foster this sense of tribe in order to sell tickets, ad revenue, and merchandise to fans such as himself. Is it that different from how people treat races, political parties, nations, and religions? In all of these cases, they are sacrificing at least their time, and at the end of the day, time is all we have, not in service to themselves or what benefits them, but for this tribe that they've dedicated themselves to. Mr. Molyneux in his video advocates a stateless society, but I don't think that's feasible. I can't offer a better alternative as nothing appears feasible to me. I don't have all the answers regarding politics and society, I simply want to wake men up. The system that enslaves you also can't live without you. In my previous video, The Matrix of Male Permission, I detail how the enslavement of men can only be accomplished through other men. The only way to keep men enslaved by other men is to place them in different tribes, so that they do not see the truth, which is that they are enslaving themselves. What if men realize that nations, religions, and races mean nothing? That we are all men. We forged our own chains. We are our own jailers. We hold the key in our own hands if we would just wake up and realize it. You don't need to rise up and fight for your freedom. Merely wake up and seize it. At the end of Stefan Molyneux's video, he says that to see the farm is to leave it. I will elaborate on that by saying that to recognize the tribes that seek to dominate you and make you a slave is to declare yourself free, and to go your own way. To be free of the matrix is to refuse to be a disposable resource, to reject as much as possible any relationship that doesn't provide a net benefit. Obviously there is no Galt's Gulch and no underwater city of rapture for us to flee to, so we must submit to our respective governments. But we must question voluntary relationships and reject tribal identities that seek to shame, guilt, pressure, and exploit us into sacrificing ourselves for the quote-unquote greater good. In reality, there is no such thing as the greater good. There are only your dreams and their dreams. Which do you want to live your life for?